Let's bring in our legal analyst, Joe Tamburino. He's a longtime criminal defense attorney here in Minnesota. He's been with us throughout the trial. Joe, good morning. Your thoughts about that sequestering decision?
Good morning, Jason. It was a very good motion for the defense to make because this jury is allowed to watch TV, listen to the radio. They're allowed to converse with family members, not about this case. And it's impossible to have avoided any information about this shooting yesterday. So it was a very good motion to make. And we have to think of this. What happens within the next few days if body-worn camera video is released about this Brooklyn Center shooting? What happens if a juror sees something like that? I think it was a very good motion to make on the defense part.
The judge makes, I think, a case that is somewhat logical where you say, okay, these jurors are already well aware that their verdict could have consequences no matter how they rule. And in fact, they expressed that concern during the jury selection process.
That's correct, but the sequestration is not really so much about will there be civil unrest and would the jury's physical being be threatened. It's really not about that. What sequestration is about is keeping jurors away from things that could influence how they see this case and how they arrive at a decision. So it's not so much whether or not they feel physically threatened, it's what from outside of the courtroom can influence their decision in this case. That's really the crux of the matter.
One other note, Joe, the judge told the court that his plan is to have closing arguments a week from today. And so that would give the jury the weekend before closing arguments, and in fact, they will be sequestered after closing. But that gives the jury kind of the weekend to get packed up and get their family ready for them to be gone for however long it takes to come up with a verdict. So it does sound like things will wrap up next Monday. So that's something the judge just shared in court.
That's correct, and that's good that he's going to give the jury a heads up, because when a jury becomes sequestered, they truly have to bring everything that they're going to need for, who knows, a day, 2 days, 3 days. So it's good that he's going to give them the weekend to prepare, and then they'll start off fresh on Monday.
Yeah, and you can also understand, I mean, jurors are people too, and especially after a trial that goes on 3 weeks long, if you start jury deliberations on a Friday, I think there's a legitimate concern that perhaps they would try to rush through things in order to wrap it up and go home over the weekend.
Correct, that could happen. And the next thing to watch for is what happens if the jury arrives at a verdict late in the evening, say something like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. I think the judge would probably consider not taking the verdict right then, but rather doing it the next day early in the morning.
Yes, no doubt there have been security preparations, discussions, plans about the timing of any potential verdict in order to give the National Guard and law enforcement time to get ready, and especially now that we know those law enforcement officers and those National Guards, men and women, have in many cases been redeployed, Joe, because of this police shooting from last night.
That's correct. And just think about what could unfold with the Brooklyn Center investigation. If somehow this becomes another tinderbox, we could have a conflagration of not only the verdict in this case, but whatever's happening with the Brooklyn Center case. It wouldn't be a good situation for anyone.
Yeah, and so the court trying to make, the court and the public officials trying to make plans to keep all of that in order. I do want to briefly mention two of the other motions that came up in this motions hearing. The first one was about a national expert in the use of force, Seth Stoughton, who's a professor. And the defense said, look, we've had enough testimony about use of force. The state asked just about every police officer on the stand their opinion of the use of force, that they've overdone it. And the judge said he was sympathetic to that, but still allowed this use of force expert to testify later today.
That's correct. That's called an objection on being cumulative. What the rules provide for is that if one party keeps bringing forth evidence that is basically the same, the judge could exclude it on the basis that it's cumulative. It's just the same thing over and over again. Now, the judge allowed it in this case to happen again, I think because the person is a national expert. But that was the correct objection to make, and of course it's always up to the judge.
This expert is more academic, where we haven't heard from a professor or someone who's studied use of force, so that's sort of the needle that the state is trying to thread here. One other issue, I know a lot of our viewers have been following the question as to whether Maurice Hall will testify, and we did learn a little bit about that in the motions this morning, where Maurice Hall, and perhaps people will remember, he is the man who was in the Mercedes SUV with George Floyd on the night George Floyd died. And he also was pointed to from George Floyd's girlfriend as someone that Floyd has bought drugs from in the past. It sounds like we're going to have kind of a questioning out of earshot of the jury tomorrow morning to see if Maurice Hall can go on the stand or not.
That's correct, and there are 3 issues here. One is, a lot of this seems to have happened in chambers, some prior chambers discussion, and we've been seeing that quite a bit in this case. You know, most of these arguments should really be happening in an open courtroom. Second, it seems like the Attorney General is not going to grant Maurice Hall immunity, but we don't know why. The judge hasn't asked for a reason for that. And third, tomorrow what's going to happen is we'll find out if Maurice Hall will really claim the Fifth, and even if he does, the judge still has to decide whether or not his statement to law enforcement back on June 2nd, 2020 is admissible under a couple of hearsay exceptions.
All right, 3 motions this morning, all pretty significant issues in the coming week as we watch for this trial to wind down. Joe Tamburino, thank you.